Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Ketubot, pages 11 through 17, Yud Aleph through Yud Zayin. Yud Aleph. Ger katan madbilin oto al dat beit din. A minor convert to Judaism can be immersed in the water to effectuate the conversion process on the say-so of the beit din. Meaning, for ordinary conversion, for an adult, the person who is changing religions needs to supply consent, their volition. They want to do this. However, a minor lacks the mental capacity to make such decisions, so in theory it should be prohibited or impossible for a minor to convert to Judaism, and yet the Talmud is saying, no, it is possible. The court itself will supply that consent. My kamashmalan. So what is the novelty of this idea? Is it to say that becoming Jewish is a favorable development in a person's life? It's advantageous, and that the court, or rather in general, we are allowed to advantage someone without their knowledge? Well, we already knew that concept, that you're allowed to advantage someone without their awareness, and you cannot disadvantage someone without their consent. So, what's the novelty here? Maudetema, akum behefker nichale. You might have thought, well, a Gentile prefers to remain a Gentile because it's an easier lifestyle. There is promiscuity that is prohibited in a Jewish context. So the Gemara says, Hanimili gadol tam tam yisuro. Well, an adult who has already enjoyed the taste of that promiscuity, for them, it would be a disadvantage to convert to Judaism, and so you could not do it against their consent. You'd have to have their permission to make them into a Jew. But a minor who doesn't know the pleasures of the flesh, who doesn't know what they'd be missing, to them becoming Jewish is entirely a favorable development, and therefore it can be done al dat beit din. Yud bet 12. Beit din shel kohanim hayugovim belibetula 400 zuz v'lamichu benam chachamim. The court of Kohanim would insist upon a 400 zuz ketubah for a virgin bride who marries, whether a Kohen or a Yisrael. If the girl came from a Kohanic family, you have to give her a 400 zuz ketubah. Even though the ordinary price for a virgin bride ketubah was 200 zuz, and this is twice as much, nonetheless, the sages did not object to the Kohanim imposing that kind of heavy financial burden on those who married Kohanic girls. Yud Gimel, 13. Haitamu uberet, a woman was pregnant. Ve'amru lamati v'shaluberze, and they asked her, well, what's the story with this fetus? Who's the father? Meish ploni v'kohen hu, and she says, well, so-and-so, and he's a Kohen. Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer mimne'amenet. So Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer says, we will believe her say-so, that the father is a Kohen. Rabbi Yeshua merlim piano chayim, whereas Rabbi Yeshua says, we don't rely upon her, we don't live based upon her word. Rather, we will take for granted, in the halachic realm, that she was impregnated by a mamzer, someone of tainted lineage, until she can prove otherwise. It's a very tough standard. Yud Daled, 14. Amar Rabbi Yossi. There was an incident, sadly, where a young girl was going to draw water from the well, and she was raped. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, if most of the people in that town are eligible for marriage with the Kohanic family, then we will assume someone from that majority was the rapist, and therefore this girl may still marry into the priesthood. Of course, if it was a majority of people in the town who did not such qualify, then her status would be downgraded to someone who could not marry into the priesthood. Tedvav. Matzah ba tinok mushlach. Let's say you find a baby abandoned. Well, what's the status of this baby? Imro of the kochavim. If the majority of the people in the town are non-Jews, then the baby will be considered a non-Jew. Imro of Yisrael, and if the majority are Jews, then we'll consider the baby a Jew. So what's if it's 50-50 exact? Yisrael will consider the kid a Jew. But lamai hilchasa, for which specific halachic purposes are we going to say we'll follow the majority this way, follow the majority that way, or follow the rule of mechza? And the answer is, akum, a majority Gentile town, we will consider the child to be a Gentile, lachil and avelos, that will allow the child to be fed non-kosher food on the premise that the kid isn't Jewish and doesn't need to keep kosher. Yisrael, if it's a majority Jewish town, we'll assume the kid is Jewish l'hachselo aveda, insofar as if the kid loses something, will return his lost article, as is required if a Jew loses an article. And mechza 50-50 l'nizakin, that if there is a case of damages and there's a distinction between the damage paid to a Gentile versus paid but to a Jew, we'll assume the kid is a Jew on the basis of mechza 50-50 town. Ted Zayin 16. Ha'aviru lefanei kos shel besora kedubata ma'atayim. If they passed in front of this girl the cup of announcement, then her ketubah is 200. Meaning, if we're not really sure what her ketubah was supposed to be, but someone recalls that back when she got married, there was a ceremony whereby they passed the kos shel besora, then rest assured she was a virgin bride who was deserving of a ma'atayim of 200 zuz ketubah. My kos shel besora, what is this cup of announcement? Kos yain shel truma. Well, it was a cup of wine that was actually truma. Mavrin lefanei, they would pass it in front of her, klomar, so as if to say, Ru'uya haitezu le'echot b'truma. This girl would have been eligible to eat truma had she married a Kohen. Now, in fact, she didn't marry a Kohen, but she would have been eligible to marry one because she was a virgin bride, untainted. And on that basis, we'll give her the full ma'atayim of the ketubah. Yud Zayin 17. Tanu Rabbanan. Mavrin tamet b'lifnei kala. We will push aside a dead body, meaning a funeral procession, to make way for a bride. And whether a bride or a funeral procession will be diverted in order to clear the path for the king of Israel. Amru alav al Agrippa Samelach, it was a story told about Agrippus II, who was Agrippus I, who was a king of Judea in the 1st century of the Common Era, before the destruction of the temple. He was a Roman vassal king, and the Talmud tends to say favorable things about him. He stepped aside so that a kala, a bride, could pass by. The Gemara asks, well, how could he do that? A melech is not supposed to give up his kavod, his honor. It's actually wrong. It might have sounded very nice for him to be so giving, but a king is not supposed to be giving in that respect. And the Gemara answers, no, it was okay because it was Parshat Drachim Havai. It was at a crossroads, at an intersection, and it wasn't apparent that the king Agrippus was giving way to a kala. He did it sort of inconspicuously so as to defer to the kala without in any way compromising the public honor of the king. Everyone have a great week.